Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Arrows Tipped with Honey from the Natural Forces series by Gill, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Chief Mage Rindarin was attacked by the nightmare creatures of the forest, drained his magecraft to protect the citadel, until all he had left was his last drop of blood. Bastion choked on a sob, his voice quavering as he continued. But that was enough. His giant sacrifice was greater than the forest could fight, and the citadel was safe. The war is over. He paused to allow his audience to show its enthusiasm. When the roars had died down, he announced, "I've been asked to take on the role of Chief Mage." Here, Bastion cast a sideways look at Hamel, who might have hidden a skeptical twitch of an eyebrow before he squeaked, "Quite right, quite right." It was hard to tell what Hamel thought. His expressions were as alien as his appearance, from his pointed head and greenish skin to the claws he tapped impatiently on the high table. "So," Bastion resumed, "I must try to fill my father's shoes. We need time to mourn and time to choose new counselors, but rest assured the forest is defeated. Our perfect society is safe once more. And we shall celebrate with the courtship dance that was postponed because of the war. Our perfect society has overcome those who would destroy it." Cheering was clearly required again at this point, so hearty hurrahs ensued. A dance would allow new adults to pair up, and weddings would follow as sure as light was gray. Undoubtedly a good thing. This time, when he paused, Bastion looked towards the slight figure beside him. He took her hand, kissed it. "My sister Verity will be with me at the dance as she is with me in mourning our father." His voice broke, and the white-faced girl squeezed his hand. "Sister? Verity?" There had been rumors that Rindarin had another child hidden away because she suffered from allergy, but now here she was, thin and pasty-faced, but sitting at the high table all the same. What to make of that? Not only was the girl sitting with the Council of 10, but she even presumed to speak in a sweet whisper amplified by speech magic. Her magecraft? Or Bastion's? She began and quickly corrected herself. "We want to commemorate Daddy," a child's slip, "our father. If you have any suggestions for how we should do so, please let Hamel know. We'll say goodbye to our beloved Chief Mage before we hold the dance." Her voice trembled. Hamel's face darkened a bilious green. He was clearly not impressed by the role he'd been given. He was one of only 4 counselors who'd returned from the battle out of the 10 who'd fought. Wasn't he a hero too? Nobody challenged the triumphant speech made by the new chief mage from the high table, but later rumors spread like a virus around the citadel, and the forbidden word forest was on everybody's lips. The most hushed question concerned what had happened to the freak, the girl who'd infested the citadel with forest, the one they called, barely mouthed the dangerous words, Queen of the Warrior Bees. Those unfortunates who'd seen her, wreathed in a cloud of her vile familiars, still had nightmares. Was she dead? If the citadel had won the war and they were all safe, she must be. But why did none of the mages say so? Who knew the truth? One person did know, but he was not in the Great Hall, or his harumph of disbelief at Bastion's speech would have been the focus of attention. Instead, the absence of Kerman, the new mage-smith, went unnoticed amid the hubbub after the speeches. Had he been missed by the other mages, they'd have merely concluded he was mourning his dead master and preparing for his new role in the citadel. If the servants noticed the blue fires that leaked raw power from the smithy through every crack in the stone, none of them was foolish enough to say so, nor to comment on the food and drink left untouched for 3 days outside the closed door to the forge. On the 4th day, the mage-smith emerged and sent for sustenance, another indication that the citadel was returning to normal after the war. But Kerman was not the man he'd been when he entered the forge, and the citadel rippled with unease. Chapter 2. Kerman's self-sacrifice was not a glorious death in battle, but the harder choice of living his mission every day. Confined in a place he hated, with people he despised. Alone. Somewhere in the forest, Myleta was soaring free with her bees, or sharing a campfire with her 2 human friends. He could have been at her side, his senses exploding in the sunlit bounty of the forest, if he hadn't volunteered to return to the citadel, to serve Myleta in her enemy's gray lair. Kerman couldn't get used to thinking of the girl he'd known from childhood under her new title, but he was here in her service, and for the sake of all who lived here. Somebody had to return with the Citadel children and nurture the future they could shape, remind them of the taste of honey. He could taste it still, the sweetness of trees and stars bursting on his tongue. He had not known how impoverished his diet was until his mouth awoke, and now the craving gnawed at him. How could he settle for the tasteless sustenance of the Citadel? How could he pretend that he preferred purity and security to being fully alive? Thanks to the Queen of the Warrior Bees, the Citadel children had known the forest and tasted honey, brought to them by the bees who made it. Surely, like him, they would never forget, even without his help. Perhaps he was not needed here after all. He could escape now before he was found out and failed Myleta anyway. The mages had sealed the water gate, but there must be some weak spot in their wards. If not, Kerman could go into the walls to seek a new way out. The wise ones who dwelled in the walls would help him, and now was his only chance, while the mages were distracted by their own tangle of outrageous lies in the aftermath of the war. He tried to imagine Myleta's welcoming smile at their reunion, but instead he saw the warrior Janlu's contempt and the forest mage Dryan's disappointment. Each of them had volunteered to return with the children, been prepared to shoulder the burden Kerman now carried. Each of them would despise him if he gave up on his task without even trying. So, Kerman must see it through for as long as it took. He had no idea how he would know if he'd succeeded, but he had promised to be Myleta's eyes and ears in the Citadel, to make sure the honey did its work. She believed that this generation of children would challenge perfection, allow the forest into the Citadel once more. Then they would all be reunited in a world where nature's rich variety was celebrated, where Myleta and those like her were not sentenced to death. He must believe that, too, stay alive and do his work, whatever that might be. Death in battle would have been so much easier. Heavy-hearted, he set to his first impossible task, to communicate with Myleta. He'd promised to make a twin to Steel Wing, the arrowhead he'd forged for her. They would connect through the arrowheads. What he hadn't told her was that he had no idea whether it would work. As he'd done 1,000 times, first as assistant, then as apprentice to Declan, he lit the fire and arranged his tools while he waited for the heat to intensify. Then he donned his leatherette gauntlets and made a metal sandwich. 5 layers of 2 different kinds of steel. Pinching the raw block tightly in long tongs, he thrust it into the white-hot heart of the flames. As he'd done 1,000 times, Kerman readied himself for the surrender to fire and darkness, the smith's partners in creation. But this time his old master's face smiled back at him from the blazing heart, a demonic vision haloed in flames. "You'll need help with this," the black semblance of a mouth breathed before clamping down on the tongs, which Kerman jerked backwards in instinctive recoil. The raw steel was pulled deeper into the inferno, and Kerman took refuge in his craft, concentrated on the making. "Declan," he greeted the fire demon as if they'd last met over a jug of Citadel ale, not on opposing sides in the battle of the forest. "You killed me, boy." It was true and not true. Declan had awoken Steel Wing's vengeance, but it was indeed Kerman's double-edged magecraft in the arrowhead. "You killed yourself," Kerman replied, remembering the smell of blood and treachery, acrid on the arrowhead he pulled from Declan's corpse. Could not have returned it to Melita like that. The beauty of its patterned waves defiled, so he cleaned it, in the same way mages on the Council of 10 cleaned the minds of servants to keep their secrets safe. But Kerman had never used his powers in such a manner, and was untrained. In cleaning the arrowhead, he'd taken it into himself, the dead man's dark history, written into his blood. Darkness and fire played over the metal, bonding the different layers, just as Declan's duplicity was wielded to Kerman's old soul. If Steel Wing was now untarnished, the same could not be said of the new mage smith. But such knowledge could be used. Kerman would read the depths of this soul so he could understand the black heart of the citadel, the forging of its citizens. "You would have killed Malita," he said. The pressure on the tongs relaxed at the name, as Kerman had expected. He pulled them out quickly and set about his work, hammering and folding, ignoring the flames behind him. When he was ready, he thrust the tongs into the forge once more, prepared for a struggle this time. He gazed into the fire as it flamed defiance, and he let his magecraft reach for the demon's thoughts, as he did with living people. For this, they called him Soul Reader. "Declan," Kerman acknowledged again, with no words of welcome or of judgment, though his stomach clenched with loss. This man had been his mentor, his role model, his surrogate father. His gut posed the first question. "How could you?" he asked. "How could you do it to me, to Mylida? You'd have killed us in the forest." "It hurt me too, boy." Declan's voice still held the gruff warmth that Kerman remembered. "You shouldn't be doing this, playing with fire." "Why?" Kerman insisted, coldly forcing an answer. "For perfection, the greater good, same as you're doing now, but you're on the wrong side, aren't you? I expect you'll betray everyone in the citadel. Again." The fiery mouth spat sparks, but couldn't reach Kerman. He mustn't waste his questions. "Did you ever love us?" His heart screamed, but aloud he demanded, "What am I supposed to do in the maturity test?" The question sounded straightforward enough, but Kerman suspected Declan had no knowledge of the terms Melita had imposed when she'd won the battle. There would no longer be a maturity test. Kerman's work as a spy had begun. "I don't know whether your magecraft is up to it, boy," the soot-black mouth sneered from the flames. "You're a soul reader, not a proper mage, but you were so good at the work, and I didn't have other choices lining up, except the girl, of course. Melita." Her name came out and spit in angry sparks. "Who'd think a baby could curl her fingers around your heart, then rip out everything you care about? My fault for forgetting where she came from, for not seeing she was riddled with forest. So I chose you, and you'll have to do the job the best you can." Kerman kept the emotion out of his voice. "What's the job?" "The maturity mages will tell you when there's to be a ceremony so you can prepare. Give the assistants the day off." "And the apprentice." Kerman was bitter. "Yes, and the apprentice. You'll have to choose one of the assistants to be your apprentice now that you've had your big promotion." Kerman ignored the jeer, kept his eye on the shaping of the steel. Heat, remove, fold, hammer, repeat, cut off the section he wanted, shape. He visualized Melita's pattern, which he had read in her mind, which she'd wanted to create for herself had she not been a girl. Waves like bees' wings, shining and flying through the folded steel of her arrowhead. He'd made it for her, his smith piece to prove himself, and now he must make its twin. Heat again. Kerman reminisced, hoping to draw out all the information he could from his ancient master. "I used to watch her when I was an assistant. She was so miserable at never being chosen, never getting her ceremony. Why wasn't she ever chosen? Why didn't you just forge her like the others, let her fit in?" "I used to let her look through the window until it was time for me to do my work. She liked to watch the procession across the greensward to the barn." The greensward. A fancy name for the grassette which was the citadel's pretense at lawn underfoot. Fake, like everything in the citadel. Kerman ached for the forest, for real grass and real trees, sighing leaves and whistling birds. Everything he'd lost because of mages like this one. He repeated his question. Why was Mylena never chosen? I don't know how the council said who's ready and who's not, but them as reach 14 and aren't ready, they're suppressed. Perfection's way. Kerman kept a tight grip on the tongs and made a guess. No doubt the council says they've died of allergy. That be the way of it, but I kept her too long, cared for her, so I told the council she must have some purpose, something good that the walls meant for us when they sent her. The face spat flame. Forest infested, not fit to forge. See that window? The fiery head jerked sideways. That's where she watched. But we can see the test in our minds, and that's the important bit, not the ceremony and fuss. You need the fires going and the welding rod hot, ready. When the candidates have proceeded through the forge, specifying is done, and they're in the barn. You'll know the moment because the maturity mage will mind call you. They can only do it when they're in the barn. That means they've done their job, and now it's your turn. You follow their link to see each candidate's mind. You'll find that bit easy. Then you take the hot rod and close off the deep thinking in each candidate, neat as a weld, cauterized. They can't feel a thing, and they're happy after. But there's one special thing I do, though I doubt you're good enough. Kerman felt sick. Tell me anyway. I leave just the blade space open in the boys. You can tell boys from girls because their minds are colored by the drinks. And the maturity mage does all that. She sorts them. What about young mages? Asked Kerman, remembering his own ceremony. Green, said Declan. I don't understand. Their minds are green from the magecraft reacting to the drinks, so you know to leave them unforged. Until Puggy, that is. She was a pleasure to seal, so easy and neat, her mind closed over. Renderin was right. It's for the best. Female mages just cause trouble. A distraction from our work. Sure enough.